I'm turning up my sound, sweetie.
All right, I'm bringing you coffee.
Okay. Okay, hello, hello. How's everybody today? Besides quiet, how are you?
Hello, got Qdoba, so we're doing great.
Okay, so I posted some stuff over the weekend, and well, let me go to the very top of this mess here. I've got 4 parts to these notes, and we're going to do parts 3 and 4 today, which is going to talk about the Scrum team and sprint activities, and specifically how we'll do it in the class. Everybody has to adapt these processes to their unique situations. Every corporation that you go to will do it differently. Every club activity, if they're aware of the sprint process, will do it differently. And of course, classes will do it differently. So we'll take some minor tweaks to accommodate the class, and I'll talk about that. And then have a section on team growth, which is kind of the phases of how teams come together, hopefully bond, form themselves into a team, and become productive. And hopefully you will go through all these stages and become productive. So let's see, where do I need to start here? We talked about how the Agile process, the Scrum process overview and what some of the elements were. So let's go through today and talk about how this is going to work for the course. I will refer you to this document, the Scrum Guide. Let me see if I can fix this better. Apologies for the ugly screen here. There we go. This document, which is available to you on the Canvas site, refer to it when you're looking at how to run your teams. And I'll talk about, ways that we're going to vary this process and ways that your team may choose to vary the process. And, maybe ways that your team really shouldn't choose to vary the process. And I also have some template documents that I'll show you. They're not uploaded to the site yet. Okay. So Agile Scrum, we've talked about before, it's an Agile process. What does that mean? Agile means that you don't do all of your planning and design up front. You do enough planning to get a shared vision among the team, shared situational awareness, enough understanding of what you think you're going to develop so you can move forward. And then you start producing the product in these short, relatively short increments. Short meaning 30 days or less, and we're using 2-week increments, so we have 5 2-week increments. The idea is, remember, if you remember the manifesto, we're emphasizing working software over documentation. Now, having said that, I am requiring some documentation for the course because it is still good to know how to do documentation. And again, people adapt this process all over the place. Some people, there's a process called Crystal Clear, very similar to Scrum. Virtually no documentation. The code is the documentation. But hardly anybody uses that. And if you're going to work for a large corporation, I promise you they're going to want documentation on top of the software. But the idea is it's at the end of each sprint, you have working software. You don't wait till the end of the semester and, oh my God, I hope it works. You have working software at the end of each sprint. Oh, and by the way, working software means that it has been tested. So you're performing development and test, development and test, development and test. Ideally, you're doing that with awareness of your team members so that they all buy in and say, yep, this is really done. The priorities are set by the business, but and we'll talk about who gets to do that, but once the priorities are set, then the team is self-organizing. So for each sprint, the team gets to determine how much of a chunk of the work they're going to try to tackle. And then once they grab hold of that, the team has control. So it's not like management gets to come down and say, thou shalt. The team has control over what they want to do next to a degree, and then how they want to do it to a large degree. And again, every iteration, real working software. Notice how I underlined those, right? So the idea is actual working software. At the end of each sprint, you actually demonstrate your software to somebody. Ideally, it's the customer. That doesn't always happen in a business environment. So you can have an internal customer in your organization. In our class, I want our TAs to serve as your customers. So they're the external entity that's requesting this thing. And I would like for you guys to be able to demo at the end of each sprint to your customers. And the idea there is you're getting feedback from your customer, right? They're the ones who are paying you to do this. And at the end of the product development, you want to deliver something that they're really happy with. Happy customers come back and give you more money. So the idea is, rather than wait till the end to see, oh my gosh, I hope they like it, you're giving them these constant small deliveries, and that way they'll be able to say, oh, I like that, but I don't like that. And can you change it? And you're changing it before it's baked into the cake. You're not having the further you go down the line in software development, the more expensive it is to do a change. So you're doing these changes right away. Again, change is going to happen. Some processes try to nail everything down with so much documentation that they constrain change, but it ends up that they rarely can constrain change. And then the agile processes say, no, we're going to adapt to change along the way. So who are the components of the team? Well, there's the customer, that external agent. Again, in a business environment, this is the person paying the bills. They're the person who says, hey, I need you to build this software for me, and I'm going to pay you for it. Inside your own company, you have a product owner, and they often will serve as the customer's representative to the team. So they're kind of an advocate for the customer. They also may represent management, upper level management to the team. The idea is they should be an experienced software engineer or experienced engineer. They are the ones who are going to set up the priorities in which things get done. So there's a little bit, I said, oh, the teams get to choose what they get to do for a particular sprint. Yes and no. There's a priority list, and you need to take care of the first higher priority items before you can get down to the lower priority items. Product owner is normally not part of the software development team, but in our class, there'll be a dual role. So again, we're modifying the system somewhat. Then there's someone called the Scrum Master. Now, it is a mistake to think that the Scrum Master is the team leader. There is no team leader. However, remember how we define teams? A team is more than one person with a shared goal and assigned roles and interdependence. So the Scrum Master is a team member who has an assigned role. And that assigned role is to help manage the team and ensure the team is able to cooperate. If the team has any issues, try to work to clear those issues. And again, in our class, the Scrum Master will be a developer also. And then the developer is the rest of the team. Now, again, in a business environment where you have teams, say, of 7, 9, 10 people, it's okay to have a Scrum Master who's not a developer, because that person's going to be busy enough just clearing obstacles for the team. But in our class, there's not that much work for the product owners and Scrum Masters to do. The product owner does the work at the beginning of the sprint. The team takes on the sprint, then the product owner and Scrum Master become part of the development team. And the Scrum Master should serve as a developer as well as Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master is doing some, hopefully not too heavily loaded management of the process throughout the sprint. Once your team gets comfortable with how a sprint is run, the Scrum Master won't have to do that much work. Like we say, oh, the Scrum Master, to say that they say run the Scrum meeting is probably not quite correct. Initially, you might have a Scrum Master, or I would rely on your TAs to give you guidance early on. But once everybody knows how a Scrum meeting works, everybody walks in there, they know what their job is, they get it done, they walk out the door. And then, of course, the development team is composed of the Scrum Master, the developers, and for us, the product owner, because the product owner's job is done once you enter the sprint. The events, and I put out a document, a P0 document to go through these events, my expectation for the course. before any sprints occur, you have to do some kind of a kickoff. You have to have some agreement on, who the team is, how they're going to coordinate, how they're going to meet, that kind of thing. Again, if you're in a business environment, you may have a team, again, ideally in a business environment, people are not assigned to a project, they volunteer for a project, and they already know how the corporation does its job. They already know how the corporation does its communications and things. You guys have to kind of build that from scratch. I notice everybody's running to Discord, which was not a surprise to me, but that's the kind of work you have to do ahead of time. And then you have a kickoff meeting. And you're initially, before you start into the sprints, you have to get some kind of product description, develop some user stories, develop your initial backlog, that kind of thing. Sometimes people actually do that as their first sprint. The first sprint might be the only sprint where you may not produce working software up front, but you're developing a framework by which the other sprints can be performed. And that's what I'm asking you guys to do this week. So you have basically a week to pull together your product description, some user stories, and your initial backlog, and some initial requirements, not requirement specifications. That's a separate thing. How complete do you have to be? Complete enough to get your sprints going, complete enough to convince the TAs and myself that you have a good vision, that the team, I should say, has a good vision of what the product is going to do when you're completed with it. Within each sprint, at the start of the sprint, there's a sprint planning meeting. And this is where the team says, this is how we're going to do this. These are the user stories. The work is chunked up into user stories. We're going to take these user stories. This is how much work we think we can handle this next 2 weeks. Each user story probably should be broken up into tasks. Almost all of them will be. So that's what this meeting is about. You have a meeting where you say, okay, we're going to break these users, we're going to take on these user stories, we're going to break them up into tasks, and then people volunteer to do the tasks. You assign effort to each of the tasks. Now up front, you tried to assign effort to each user story. By that, I mean, okay, here's a user story. How long is that going to take? That's 8 hours of work. Okay, we broke it up into 3 tasks. 2 hours, 2 hours, and 4 hours. And then people volunteer to take these on. This effort estimate is important. Consider yourself, think about this right now. You're going to do a 2-week sprint, you're one person. How many hours a week can you devote to the class? Okay, 8 hours a week. So in a sprint, you've got 16 hours worth of development time. Okay, the sprint meeting is going to take an hour. The end of sprint meeting is going to take an hour, maybe 2. Your team gets to decide that. So you've got maybe 14 actual working hours. 14 actual working hours, 2 hours of that are going to get eaten up with just junk, answering email or junk. And so you maybe have actual 12 hours of development time. So what this is doing is giving you a way to establish a load that is achievable and not overwhelming in each sprint. And then what's going to happen during the sprint, you have this daily scrum. Now we say daily scrum, and ideally, man, if your teams can meet daily, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But if your team says, okay, we're going to have our scrum 3 times a week or something like that, that's fine too. You just have to clear that with your customer and with myself. If you say this team is going to meet, we're going to have our daily scrum once a week, I might let you try that for a bit just to see how quickly you'll fail. Not fail the course, but fail the process. But probably not. If you only meet once a week and update yourselves once a week, history shows that that is a failed technique. So there's somewhere in the middle there that things work out. Daily is best, meaning 5 times a week. And then, somewhere less than 5 is probably more realistic for a course, probably. But let's pretend you guys get to meet 5 times a week. You say, oh my God, that's a lot of meetings. It's going to take up all my time. No, the whole point of the Scrum, it's designed to be a rapid fire, quick meeting. In fact, we do this thing called time boxing, right? We're out of time. We've allocated 15 minutes for this meeting. And at 15 minutes, we are done. So you take advantage of that notion of time boxing, and I've recommended time boxes for different events as I'm putting up these assignments. Your sprint meeting should be 15 minutes max. With 4 people, it's probably a 10-minute meeting. You literally walk in and say, okay, this is what I did yesterday. This is what I'm going to do today. And this is the problem that I'm going to have getting it done. And you don't try to solve the problem in the meeting. You just acknowledge the problem exists. And then outside of the meeting, you and another person tries to work through it. And if you've got a dedicated Scrum Master who's also not a developer, it falls on that person's shoulders to do the follow-up and clearing. But usually it's something like, oh, but I needed this, I needed access to this class. I needed access to this data that someone else is in charge of. And they'll say, oh, I have that over here. I'll put it on the shared website or whatever. Okay, problem's done. And then you actually have to do development work, obviously, during the sprint. You know, we have all these meetings, but the goal is they're all short. They're not there to take up your time. They're there to actually improve the process. So in addition to the meetings, you actually do development work. Now, I know for myself and historically for students, development work means you go back to your apartment or you go back to your dorm and you tell your roommate to leave you alone and you're developing code. And I'm really going to push you to change that mindset. Your development should be done with another member of your team, ideally all 4 of your team. Again, in an ideal world, you're physically co-located, all 4 of you are going to be in a lab, or you're going to go to the library study hall, you know, study rooms, or you're going to go to someplace or someone's apartment, and you're all going to work together for 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever, developing your own code. And there's something very magical about that. Now, we're in a pandemic. You guys are students with a lot of other classes. Do I expect you guys to co-locate and develop code for 2 hours a day? No. But I'm encouraging you that as long as you are developing code, every time you're developing code, be in contact in some fashion with at least one other team member. And this is where Discord works, right? Because that works in a pandemic. Now you can go to your dorm, you can go to your apartment, you can tell your roommate not to bug them. You're coding, but while you're doing that, you are in communication with, you know, you're in the same virtual space as another team member. The idea behind this is that teams can work really well when they're co-located and they share information very well. It's called osmotic communication. So if some reason you get sick, not COVID, you just get the flu, let's say, and you're down for a day and you're like, oh, I was going to finish this class. I was going to finish this piece of software, but now I'm too sick and I can't. Maybe another team member can step in and finish it. And the only reason they can finish it is because they know so much about it, because you were there telling them about it while you were developing, and they were there telling you about their software while you were developing. Think about it. We're going to do this in an object-oriented way. And objects, what do? They communicate with other objects. So if I have a class that I'm in charge of and someone else is going to do another class, you know, those 2 classes are going to communicate and coordinate in some fashion. Maybe the 2 humans that are developing the code should also communicate and coordinate in some fashion. So this notion of the co-located development is a big deal. It's hard to pull off in an academic setting. I'm acknowledging that. It's hard to pull off because in the real world, right, in industry, why are those people able to sit in the same room and co-locate and develop code? Because that's literally their only job. The team is devoted to that product for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day, whatever the company is doing. Which means that there aren't 4 other classes grabbing their attention, 4 other classes homework assignments grabbing their attention, clubs, Greek organizations, right? So, you know, we have to recognize in an academic environment that's a great goal, and I strongly encourage you to do it to the best you can. But I recognize that it's not going to happen in a pure sense. Okay, now here comes the end of the sprint. You've done some kind of development work as a team, and you have working code. Even at the end of your first sprint, you'll have working code. So you do a review. Basically, the sprint review is another meeting, and you time box these things, and you demonstrate your product, demonstrate the working code. Who do you demonstrate it to? Well, this goes back to the product owner. Since your product owner is part of the development team, I'd like you to demonstrate it to your customer, who would, in our case, is the TA, and or myself. I'm going to try to, there's 12 teams. I don't know if I can see all 12 teams demonstration at the end of every sprint. But I will see as many as I can. And throughout the semester, I will attend at least one for every team to see not just the product, but I want to see the team dynamics. Okay, so that's product, that's assessment. Now, what happens if you got a user story and it didn't get done? Chunk it back into the backlog. So you can take user stories and, oh, shoot, we wanted to get to this and it just didn't happen, or it's partially done. If it's partially done, what you do is you create another user story about the remaining part, chunk it into the backlog. After you're done with all that, which is your assessment on progress and devoted to the product, then you have another meeting where you do an assessment about yourself as a team. What worked? What didn't work? So for example, I'm on a team of 4 professors. We ended up meeting, we meet twice a week, right? So there's our scrum twice a week. That's not very often. And we found that initially we were meeting twice a week for 15 minutes and that wasn't enough. So we changed one to an hour-long meeting at the maximum. Usually lasts about a half an hour, and one to a 15-minute. And for some reason, having that one half an hour together, we get a lot more work done. So that was something that, as a result of our retrospective, we determined. We also changed how we share documents as a result of our retrospective. So the whole point of the retrospective, by the way, sometimes you'll see the word reflection for that, is about assessing how the team works or doesn't work, and what needs to happen to improve the team cohesiveness and effectiveness. Often it's about, how are we going to share documents? How are we going to annotate changes in the code? How are we going to coordinate? How can we do the scrums? What if you start out doing daily scrums? You're a team who miraculously can do a daily scrum. And then you find out, man, that's really a burden on us as students. And we don't really get that much value out of 5 meetings a week. So let's back off to 3. That would be part of your sprint retrospective. Or you might say, we're meeting 3 times a week for our scrum, and that doesn't seem to be enough. And you have to find a way to change that. And then lastly, when all the sprints are done, you've got a product on your hands that you deliver to the customer. I'm the ultimate customer here, right? But your TAs are serving as your external customer. You're going to deliver, and I will ask, because at the end of course stuff, I need artifacts by which I can justify grades to people and show ABET that we actually ask you guys to do these things. So at the end of the semester, you'll have your actual delivery of the product demonstration, and documentation. How much documentation is involved in the sprint process or in the Agile process? Like I said, it varies wildly depending on the environment you're in. I am going to ask you guys to do a software design document, a software requirement specification. The backlog is something you should be doing anyway as part of the sprint. I'm going to ask you to keep a record of that and turn that in. And your sprint backlogs are something you're supposed to be doing anyway. I'm going to ask you to keep a record and turn that in. And lastly, a test document. All of these relatively lightweight because you're in a class, and I understand you have other classes that you have to deal with. And all of them are designed to be meaningful to the process and fits in nicely with the process. For example, I said, if you're going to take on a task and a user story for a particular sprint, at the end of the sprint, that user story is done. That means that working code was developed and tested. So what you're going to do as part of the sprint, not just write the code, you're going to write your test cases and then you're going to do the tests, and all I'm asking you to do is fill that out in a spreadsheet that I provide to you at the time you did the test. Don't wait. If you wait, you'll never capture that stuff. Instead, here's the tests we ran. We ran. Then at your end of sprint meeting, you can, everyone can pull up that spreadsheet and say, okay, here's the test we did. Everyone can agree that you actually completed a user story. The rest of these slides go into a little bit more detail about the process, but these two slides are supposed to give you the overview, the players and the events. So let me pause and let you guys pepper me with questions.
I have one.
Yes.
So you mentioned a spreadsheet that you're going to provide to us. Is that how
Yes.
we like record our backlog and
Yeah.
all our user stories and stuff like that?
Yes, and if you want to use some other product, that's fine, but I need to have uniformity among the teams. And so this spreadsheet works. Spreadsheets actually work pretty well for this kind of thing, for backlogs. So yes, I will provide that to you. In fact, I want to show that to you guys today.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole software industry now built around creating tools for Agile, Scrum process, or other Agile processes. And some of them people like, and some of them people don't like. I'm trying to keep it simple. So, spreadsheet. Again, I have visibility into the spreadsheet too. Other questions?
Question about actual project.
Actual what?
The actual project,
Sure.
deciding what we will code.
Yeah.
If someone in the group has a piece of software that they've begun, to code, but maybe it's not finished, do you want us to start something from scratch, or if it can be built off of something existing and just prove that we've used the Agile process?
It depends, yeah. So if the extension is significant enough that it would have been a good standalone project, that's fine. If someone has a product that's almost complete and all you're doing is putting some finishing touches on it, then that doesn't justify the course, the amount of effort that's expected for the course. So, but if you take something that someone else has and you actually extend it significantly, then yeah, that's fine. Now, what's significant? I don't know until I see it. I don't know how to give you a metric for that.
Okay, yeah, so if it does come up, then we'll just present it to you in some way, and then
exactly, yeah. All these things get cleared initially through the TAs, and if they're confused, then they'll bring it to me. I'm trying to, because there's so many of you, I'm trying to offload some of the responsibility as much as I can. Now, having said that, if you do find that you're in a situation like that, that's actually a big benefit, because when you go out into the real world, you will rarely be creating software from scratch. You will often be adapting or extending or patching software that already exists, and that's good experience. You probably have all experienced this in some form, where you say, oh, I've got this old code, or somebody else has this old code, and so I'll use it as a basis and extend it, and within a short period of time, it's like, oh, I just have to trash the old stuff and start from scratch, because it is difficult to take existing code and extend it. You're having to live with decisions that other people made that they probably didn't even explain to you. It's kind of like the ghosts of software developers in the past. The reason they don't explain it to you is because often they've moved on to other projects and left little or no documentation and not clear code. Other questions?
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the question.
Are there any requirements for the language used, or some limitations for project IDs?
I don't want to put a limitation on that. Yeah, that's a good question too. And the reason is, I might cut off some really cool stuff if I did that. And a complex software, and the goal is to get relatively complex software here, is complex no matter what language you're dealing with. I'm sure there's more questions. Let me pause here. I have no idea what I have open on my screen here. I posted this. Project overview where I go through these different deliverable names and provide you with some descriptions of them. And then I go through, hey, okay, here's your pre-sprint activities. That's going to result in terms of the course for it's a standalone assignment where you get deliver 2 things, you know, and I'm developing that assignment. I think the hardest thing that's going to be to get across is, oh, you want me to do the product definition in the software design document, not the design, right? Not the software design. You know, that's too early for that. I want you to describe to me what the product will do and, you know, how users might use it. What can users do with it, I should say. It's all about what, not how. And the biggest question there is, well, how big of a description does it have to be? And that's a hard question to answer. You need to fully define to the degree that you can at this time what the product is. I suspect that will be, I don't know, 1.5 pages or something like that. It's not going to be a paragraph. It's certainly not going to be a sentence. And then your initial product backlog. So that's where you're developing, you know, user stories. I'm also asking you to develop requirements. This is kind of a heavy lift, but the good news is, in terms of requirements and user stories, I do not anticipate that you'll have a complete set yet. I also want to make a distinction between requirements and requirement specifications. Unfortunately, we don't get to that next week. Requirements specifications are really highly structured, atomic, testable. Again, those of you that went through CS225 with me probably got dinged on your requirement specifications because they are difficult to write, and the first time through people don't get it very often. But a requirement is not that. A requirement is just saying the software needs to do this, the software needs to do this, the software needs to do this. Again, you're describing what you need the software to do in a larger general way without meeting the requirement specification formats. Again, requirement specifications have to be atomic, meaning they only talk about one thing, and they have to be testable, meaning I can make a clear distinction between passing and failing that requirement. That's a specification of a requirement. The way requirements initially come to you is in this more general way, and that's all I need now. The goal is, again, to get you to think through what the software product is going to do, what it's going to do, not how it's going to do it, but what it's going to do by the time you're done with the semester. Those in turn will give rise to your user stories. And then from there, later on, I'm going to ask you for the actual requirement specifications. How many? I'm not sure yet, because I don't know, you know, you guys are going to report to me what the course load is here. You know, how much are we burdening you? And we need to make sure you have some experience doing these activities without having you have to drop all your other classes in order to do this course. Well, I guess you drop this class first, yeah. Okay, so this document talks about in a more text-based way, not a PowerPoint way, the different deliverables and the pre-sprint activities. One of the things that I'm putting in here is meeting notes. Okay, we all know how this works in teams. If we're not careful, then you have 1 or 2 people going along for the ride, and we have to try to figure out how to assign grades as individuals. Unfortunately, in the Agile world, assessment is based on the team, not the individual. So what I'll do is I'll give an assessment or a grade to the team, but then I'll factor in participation rates, basically. And how am I going to get participation rates? That's really hard to get. In the past, people do like team peer reviews, anonymous team peer reviews and things like that. But I don't trust those, especially when there's only 4 people in the team. So I need to do this through observation. If we were in a real world class situation, I could do that. but I need to do that virtually here. So I want to, I want to sit in on your meetings as much as I can. That won't be that many meetings, but I want to sit on your meetings. I want to watch the team dynamics. One of the things in your sprint backlog is that you're telling me who these tasks are assigned to. Well, I can see there who's participating and who's not, but your meeting notes will help with that too. They don't have to be formal. They don't have to be, you need to capture what happened in the meeting, but I'm not talking about your Scrum meetings, but I'm talking about your sprint planning and your demos. Just give me something, give me an attendance list at least, so I can tell who's participating. So I'm asking for that, but I'm not giving you a strict guidance on formatting. If I find that it's inadequate, then I'll just work with that individual team to work something out. Everything else, I think that's the only real busy work I'm giving here. The others are supposed to be part of the process, improving the product and improving the team's efficiency. Okay, hi Buddha. Let me see. Oh, let's go back to this. Okay, I'm going to go through these charts a little quicker because we've covered the basics of it, and now some of these charts are repetition. Your team is typically 5 to 9 people. Oh, typically 5 to 9 people. See, we're already violating the rule. We're at 4 people. Self-organizing. Product owner is often not part of the team, but we're going to fold the product owner back into the team. Once the sprint begins, the Scrum Master is part of the team, and everyone else, in this case, everybody gets to do development work. What I need you guys to do, I don't care who's the product owner, you guys pick it, but next sprint, pick another one, next sprint, pick another one, next sprint. I want everyone to experience what that's like to be a product owner, and the same with the Scrum Master. So you're going to rotate that. It is abnormal for that to happen throughout the course of a project, of course, but again, this is an educational experience, and I want you guys to be able to experience each aspect of the development process. Questions about that? Okay. Okay, here's all the things the product owner is responsible for, the features of the product, the release dates. Okay, I'm kind of setting the release dates for you, right? The profitability of the product. This doesn't really apply in an educational setting. Features prioritization is going to be the big one. And the selection of features for every iteration. Now, here's how that works. There's a weird push me pull you here, and your team is going to figure out how it works best. Think of the product backlog as a set of tasks that have to be done, because that's what it is. They're generally expressed as user stories. In this class, they're going to be expressed as user stories. And then you take a user story, you assign an effort estimate to it, how many hours it's going to take, and then you prioritize it. I think that should be a team activity. However, ultimately, the product owner gets to set the priority. So if 3 people on the team thinks, no, this should be priority number 7, not 8, and the product owner thinks it should be 8, not 7, it's 8. But it's unfair to say to the product owner, okay, that's your job, and the whole team leaves, and this poor person has to come up with a prioritization list for 30 or 40 different items. That's, I find, unfair. So the team should do the first pass, product owner gets the final say. And then the same is true of the sprint. When you're setting up, okay, here's what we want to do each sprint. And I said, oh, the team gets to do that. That's also a product owner team activity. And I don't care. I'm going to let the teams decide. If the product owner gets to be the dictator for that, that's fine for your team. If you want it to be a team decision and the product owner gets shut out, technically the product owner is part of the team, right? When you're deciding how much to take into a sprint, I'm fine with that too. Scrum Master, not the team leader. There are no team leaders. But the Scrum Master does have some special responsibilities. Interface to the management. Technically, that's through the product owner, but again, the product owner as part of the team. Ideally, the Scrum Master is a more experienced person, but we're going to rotate those roles, right? So you might want to have your more experienced person early in the semester and your least experienced person be the Scrum Master later in the semester after they've gained some experience. Their main thing is to make sure the team is operating as it should, which is a weird thing to say because they're not the team leader, right? They don't have any, you know, carrot and stick to work with. But the idea is make sure the following process. So for example, in your Scrum meeting, which is a 10-minute meeting, and someone wants to talk about, you know, they went to the beach yesterday, you know, it's okay for the Scrum Master to take charge of that meeting and say, no, 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 you talk about that outside the meeting. You know, we only have 10 minutes. Everybody do their reports.
Professor?
Yeah.
So for a Scrum Master, so what's the limitation to that? So like the Scrum Master will suggest a solution, but the person who make the decisions will be the one.
The Scrum Master, a solution to what?
Like for example, like if a developer have a problem, so Scrum Master just gives the suggestions, like an idea, and then the developer decide that how to solve that problem by themselves, right?
Yeah, so in the Scrum meeting itself, someone will say, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I did today. Oh, and here's a problem I'm having. So let's say I don't know how to make this method work, or you know, I'm trying to troubleshoot this piece of software and I can't find the bug. Okay. So yes, the Scrum Master might say, again, you're not going to solve the problem in the meeting. That's not the job. It's to identify the problem. The Scrum Master might say something like, because that person is more experienced, okay, you know, work with me after the meeting. Ideally, the team has to solve that problem. So it's not the responsibility of the Scrum Master to guide that person necessarily. I mean, I see here it says guide and mentor Scrum values and practices. Notice that's not software development, it's the Scrum values and practices. So ask yourself, in an Agile situation, how can we solve that problem? This one person has a problem, can't debug the code. Well, in an Agile situation, ideally you're co-developing in a co-located way. And so the team solves that problem. You know, the person says right then and there, I can't figure this where the bug is, and other people on the team volunteer to help. So that's the Agile solution. Okay, how does that work in a Scrum meeting? I can't solve this piece of code. And then the Scrum Master says, well, normally so-and-so does software development at 6 o'clock tonight, you know, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. They reserve that on Wednesdays for software development. Can you be in a Discord room with them at the same time? Or can you physically meet with them in the library at the same time? And you guys can work on that bug together, right? That's the Agile solution, but it's not solving the problem. It's setting up a mechanism by which that person can get help. Or even talk to the TA. Right? Suggest that they talk to the TAs and get some help. Did that answer the question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. They can't command it, right? They can suggest it. Well, mediating cooperation. Oh, that's the same thing. Okay. Now that, again, your teams are small enough and hopefully you're going to get into it. Once you get into a rhythm, these roles get less onerous, because once you get into a rhythm where you know, okay, you know, I always try to set aside Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons for coding. Everybody knows that. I'm always in Discord at the same time, or I'm on a Zoom meeting at the same time, or I'm, you know, in the library at the same time, you know, and people know where to come find me. You know, your team starts to coordinate better, ideally. You know, we'll have to talk later about what happens if you get the clunker of a team member. Some people are not, you know, some people are not, for whatever reason, maybe invested in the class or having time for the class. We have to be careful about that in this situation, because as you know, everybody's still in some kind of a stressful situation or an unusual situation. You know, we're still in a pandemic situation. People still get sick. People's family members still get sick. So we have to be a little bit, you know, charitable, I think, with that. On the other hand, some people are just, you know, shirking their duties. And then, you know, how do we deal with that? We'll talk about that later. But basically, the product owner can get the TA and myself involved in those situations, and we try to figure out a solution together. Okay, then we have the developer. This is the anonymous do-gooder that actually does work, right? The idea here, though, is you are not supposed to be assigned work. You're supposed to volunteer work. Now, having said that, let's say the sprint has a total of, everyone thinks the sprint has 40 hours of work in it. Ideally, there's four of you, you would all volunteer for 10 hours worth. And if somebody's only volunteered for 5 hours worth, you know, peer pressure can usually get that person to feel a little guilty enough to volunteer for the other 5 hours. Or it may be, you know, maybe that person says, you know what, I've got a wedding this weekend. I know I can't commit. So I'm going to do 5 hours this sprint, but I'll pick up 15 hours the next sprint, or, you know, whatever. The team works that out. It is volunteering. Sometimes that gets turned into voluntold, you know, but ideally everyone is volunteering for these. Self-organizer. So again, I'm trying to give you guys freedom in terms of, like Benny asked about what languages can you use. You're off the screen now. Asked about, you know, can we expand on existing software? I'm trying to give you enough freedom with that. You self-organize, and you self-organize the products you want to work on and how you want to work. So if you guys want to all go to Discord, which it looks like a lot of teams are, that's fine. I only request that you give me visibility in that. Where are you going to store your software? Where are you going to store your shared documents? You know, you guys want to make your own Microsoft Teams page as a document repository? Do you want to use Google Docs? Do you want to use the Canvas website? I don't care, as long as you at some point give me visibility into what you're doing so I can see what's happening. So you get to organize how this stuff works. And I'm not going to assign product owner and scrum master, right? I want the teams to do that. But I would, if you can't contact one, contact me. Yeah, and then we'll try to get a hold of that person. And obviously, you know, obviously that's not a good sign if right off the bat we're having trouble contacting people. Sprint. We're doing 15-day sprints. Now I have deadlines, right, for the assignments, and I'm going to be flexible with those too. And the reason is, you know, I've got a sprint that starts on a Monday and ends on a Sunday, which means technically you would be doing your product demonstration on a Sunday and doing your sprint retrospectives on a Sunday. Let's give ourselves a couple of days window here so that you guys can, as a team, in coordination with your TA, so they have an expectation, say, okay, instead of a Sunday, we're going to do that on a Tuesday. But once you set it up for one sprint, try to keep it the same for every sprint. So I'm not going to have hard deadlines. You know, if you don't meet this deadline, you get 0 points for the assignment kind of thing. Because we need to be flexible with this stuff. Similarly, let's say you say you're going to do your demo on a Tuesday and the next sprint starts on a Wednesday. Well, maybe you can't meet until Thursday, right? So you're going to do your sprint planning meeting on Thursday. Okay, well, let's accommodate that. We have to be a little bit flexible here. That's the whole point of the Agile system. Having said that, you know, still box yourself into these 5 2-week, roughly 2-week periods, and be aware of what's happening within your team. And my guess is, you know, if we're doing it right, you're going to go through the first sprint and maybe the second sprint, and then you're going to change how you do stuff. And that's called progress, right? That's the Agile process working properly. Okay. Now, please don't abuse that. Oh, we're going to turn in our first sprint 2 weeks later. No, that's not going to work. we've already talked about the Scrum. What did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? What is anything that's stopping me from what I'm doing? And you don't necessarily, again, you can't solve the problems there because it's going to be a short meeting. But you identify the problems, and maybe you identify, okay, talk to so-and-so. You got that problem? Talk to so-and-so. They can help you. Okay, good. Outside the meeting, you go talk to so-and-so. And again, you guys will learn to be disciplined, I hope. So again, you're not coming in and talking about non-meeting issues. When I was at NASA, here I am talking about non-meeting issues. When I was at NASA, they had a great meeting protocol because we had meetings all the time. And you're going to be in a meeting with 10, 20, 30, 40 people. And the head of the meeting was always saying one meeting at a time, one meeting at a time. So basically you're going around the room and people are doing kind of this. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what's stopping me. Here's where we are. And if other people were whispering and saying and having side discussions, they shut it down immediately, one meeting at a time. And if they kept whispering, they'd say, take it outside. If you guys need to talk about something, leave the meeting. I loved it because here at Riddle, when we have meetings, it's like a circus. Everyone's always talking over each other. But it was great. You got stuff done. Now with only 4 people, shouldn't be an issue. But remember what you're there for. Your job is to get out of the meeting, right? What did I do yesterday? What did I do today? What problems do I have? Okay, we're done. And if the meeting lasted 6 minutes, good for you. You picked up, 9 minutes of free time. If you have a meeting planned for an hour, don't let it go more than an hour. This time box thing, don't let it go more than an hour. And if you're done at a half an hour, good. You got a half an hour of your life back, right? The product backlog, we'll talk about that a little bit more. This is the product owner's job. Sprint start, we talked about that already. Sprint during, we talked about that already. Sprint, and so you're getting this information several times. All right, before I go into team growth, let me show you these templates that I have for things. If I can find them. I'm not done yet with my requirement specification document. The software design document, fairly simple. All I want you to do is, let's get in the title page, give me your team members, team name. I want you to name your team, by the way. Name your team. That's always good for esprit de corps. And it's similar to what you guys did for me in 225. In fact, I use that as a basis. The introduction, and then the product description, the what, not the how, and then product requirements, not the requirement specifications. And this is a repository for your user stories initially. Unfortunately, I'm going to have you duplicate them. So hopefully we'll have those always stay in sync. And then we get into problem solution. Now you're going to talk about how you did it. You're going to give me the UML diagrams. You're going to give me, I was pretty loose about this in 225 where people just plopped a UML diagram down. Tell me what each class is, what it does, what's its job, how does it relate to other classes, this kind of thing. And then initially, obviously, you won't have that, and then any references that you need. So, I'm hoping it's not going to be a 50-page document. If it isn't, if it ends up being then that's okay. But I don't expect that it's going to be a 50-page document. And I will give you guidance along the way. So the idea is, every time you complete a sprint, you're going to have this updated document, which gives me an opportunity to come back to you and say, yeah, you really need more detail here. Or you need to tell something here. Now in 220, CF 225, when people were turning that in, I had trouble giving really good feedback because I had 80 people in the class. But here I've only got 12 teams, so I can give good feedback to 12 documents. For whether that's good or bad, you guys will have to decide. Okay, and then for the SRS template, I want to use, we'll talk about this next week. I'm going to use this. Now this is overkill. This is a template that came from, I think from IEEE, and it's a little bit of overkill, but, no, hold on, I want to get to this part. the headings. But if you look through the headings of this document, I'll post it next week. Introduction, general description, and then they go into specific requirements. And there's some nice features here that I like. External interface requirements, behavioral requirements, and non-behavioral requirements. The behavioral ones are what we focused on most of the time, the functional requirements. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. These are the actual requirements specifications where you actually talk about one thing at a time. They're atomic, they have clearly identified pass-fail criteria, and you can construct test cases from these. And again, this document initially, I'm not asking for at all. After the first sprint, I want you to fill out these for the user stories that you've completed. Now your team has to describe how that works. When you're doing your users, your sprint planning meeting, okay, here's the user stories that we're going to take in. At that time, you need to define what the notion of done is, right? We've talked about that a little bit before. So your user story, the team decides, okay, how do we know if this is done? And your team defines and decides and agrees on how that's completed. Okay, I know when a user story is done when these things occur. And that's just a nice general natural language description. And then from there, you can say, okay, what requirements do we have to generate to prove to ourselves that this user story is done? I'm not going to ask for a complete list because we don't need a 120 or a 200-page document here. But go through the process of saying, okay, here's the user story, here's colloquially our notion of done, and here's 3 requirements that we have to pass in order to say that it's done. Does that make sense? Now, a document like this, I'm going to give you an abridged form of this document. It's a little too heavy for the class. A document like this, some people say, oh, that falls into the category of busy work. But think about it. What's your goal? What is the goal of the development team? To develop quality software. How do you know if you've developed quality software? You test it. No matter what kind of process people come up with, no one has found a better way to prove the quality of software other than testing. So again, I'm asking you to do this, but I'm asking you to do it as a way to both improve the quality of your product and to learn how to write requirements, because the odds are you're going to go to work for a company that requires requirements generation. In fact, those of you that are software engineers, you're going to take at least one more course just on requirements specification. And then if you go to grad school, you get to take another course at the grad level on requirement specification. So this is giving you an introduction to that. Okay, the other documents, the spreadsheets. Product backlog and sprint data. So this is, there we go. Top, like a cover page, just, give me your project name, team members. I keep trying to change that to product, not project. And then for the backlog, you put all your user stories in the SDD, and they all have an identification. Learn to identify everything. And then you're going to just take, okay, now we can take all those and identify them in the backlog. So you give the story ID, give it a short name just for use, what requirement it's related to. Again, why do you have this user story? If it wasn't required, why are you doing the work? So related requirement. Give an initial estimate of how many hours you think it's going to take. You don't have to be right, just give an estimate. And then this is the one you get to argue over. Well, you get to argue over both these, I guess, the estimate and the priority. And the priority, again, ultimately the product owner gets to decide. Now remember, there can be no ties in the priority system. There has to be a clear, everybody has to be ranked relative to someone else, and there can be no ties. So ultimately the product owner gets to decide that. And then just for, just a reminder of what the user story was in comments. So this is the thing that you'll be filling out in the pre-sprint. And then at the end of each sprint, this thing gets updated. Oh, I lost it. Can we use GitHub to create sprints? The UI is really good. Yeah, and I expect everybody's going to use GitHub, and some of these things fall under the GitHub tools. Yeah, that's fine, but I need visibility and I need uniformity. So I'm asking you to give me something, give me this as your product backlog. Now, you may convince me halfway through the semester that this other UI will work out just as well or fine, and then we can change that. That would be part of the sprint retrospective. Yeah, I'm assuming people are going to use GitHub, and I personally need to get smarter at GitHub because professors never get a chance to develop code, so I use simple tools. But yes, GitHub has all kinds of helpful things, and in fact, when people say that they don't want to do documentation, that's why, because these tools are giving you an ability to document the same information that are in these external documents happen in the tool. If you pull code out and put code in and you actually do the work and put a comment in as to what was changed in the code and why, then that's your documentation. The trick is though, people aren't normally that disciplined. People change the code and they don't tell you what they changed or why. And now the code doesn't work and nobody knows what's happening, right? So you have to go back and roll back to a previous version. You've lost all that work. Or they've modified something and we're not sure why the code doesn't work the same as it used to, that kind of thing. By the way, does GitHub also have unit tests, automatic unit tests? I know that like Eclipse does. And I would recommend that you guys incorporate that. Yeah, okay. So if you're going to use like Java and Eclipse, the JUnit testing in Eclipse is really easy. I highly recommend you do unit testing that gets automatically reperformed every time you update the code. And I can show you how to do that in Eclipse. I need to learn how to do it in GitHub or other utility that you would want to use. You don't have to use GitHub. And again, if you're in GitHub, give me access so I can pour through your code and, in my off time, read through your code. Okay. We talked about burn down charts before and they were always graphical in format. From the backlog, you can do the burn down chart. And basically all I've done is you take your product backlog, you've got effort estimate. From there, you can get a total, right? That's why Excel is fine for this because you can do it. And planned effort remaining. Okay, so at the end of before your first sprint, you're going to say, okay, we've got all these user stories, and it looks like we've got 300 hours worth of work. Well, that's what you put there, 300. And then you just linearly drop it down. Now, normally this is a graph. I don't care. You can use these 2 columns. And then if you want to make a graph from those columns, Excel lets you do that really easily. That's fine. If you don't want to, that's fine. And then you have actual effort remaining, 300. And as you go through your sprints and do your daily scrums, we'll have a sprint backlog doing the same thing. You can say, okay, I don't know. I think we've got 60 days. So a 60 days, 300, what is that? 5 hours a day. So that would be 295, 290, blah, blah, blah. That's the ideal. It's a linear straight line approach. And then you say, oh, okay, actual. Oh, we didn't do anything because it was Sunday. And then we did, a little bit of work, but it was raining. And then we did, then we did a whole lot of work that day was reported, that kind of thing. And then you get your actual. And the idea is, graphically, humans love graphs, right? You see the straight line and then you see that you're either above or below the line. Well, if you're above the line, you're behind schedule. If you're below the line, you're ahead of schedule. And the only thing that's going to change here is sometimes at the end of a sprint, you are actually going to create new user stories. You're going to add to your backlog, and there's going to be a hard break where the backlog got added to, And so we should have been, we're down to 260 hours, let's say, but now we added to the 260. We added to the backlog. So it's like, oh, now we're back up to 290 again. We went backwards. And then you'd redo your linear, your linear tailing off or burn down from 290 down to 0. At the end of the semester, you're at 0. And then your actual effort would be, again, would be reset. Okay, so I'm just a simple Excel sheet to fill out. For each sprint, you take your user story. And remember, user stories could get broken up into separate tasks. So user story, a task that was associated with that user story. Now, it may be one-to-one. Maybe the user story is just one task. Maybe the user story is 2 or 3 tasks. And then here's how I get to see participation. Tell me who you assigned it to. You can put in some kind of status. I'm not that, I had instructions to use like, green or whatever, but whatever you want for status, and then estimate the hours. So for example, you have a user story. It's supposed to take 6 hours. Well, when you add up the 3 tasks, it should add up to 6 hours, right? And then I have a, formulas already pre-populated in here for you to do the ideal burn down rate. And this is the burn down rate for the sprint, not for the whole product. And, if you need to monkey around with those formulas to make it work out right, that's fine. But the idea is then every time you do your scrum, ideally daily, but it's not going to be every time you do your scrum, then you get to report how many hours are left. So that's what these columns are for, effort remaining. Okay, so if someone says, okay, I needed to do task 1, task 2, task 3, these were all assigned to Garfield. All assigned to Garfield, and it's 2 hours, 3 hours, and 2 hours. And then I said, oh, okay, on this one, I completed this one, so there's no more time left on that, but I haven't done these 2 yet. And then we come back a couple days later and I say, well, I'm halfway done with this one and I haven't started this one yet. And then by the time we're done, I say, okay, I got them all done. Does this make sense? So as you report in your scrums, the scrum manager should auto-populate this, and then the product manager can take the scrum results and bring it back to the burn down page. Does this make any sense? Now, what if you hate these?
Yep.
Okay, what if you hate these Excel sheets? I'm going to ask you to live with it for the first sprint or 2. And then if you come up with modifications and clear it through me, then that's fine. I've got a page built for you for every sprint. And I've got an instructions page, which hopefully is more helpful than harmful.
So I have a question. If we
Yes.
did use something, some UI like Jira or the GitHub thing, would we have to translate what we get from that UI into this spreadsheet and just turn it in the spreadsheet?
Initially, I'm asking you to do that, yes, because I want uniform.
Okay.
Now, if I look at that after a sprint or 2 and I'm like, wow, that's really great, I don't need your spreadsheet anymore, that's fine too. But I'm not going to answer that until we live it.
Okay.
Okay. As long as you can see what I need to see. I need to see participation from individual team members. And then because they're reporting whether their tasks are done or not, I know not only that they were assigned stuff, but did they actually do stuff? And one of the reasons this works, and one of the reasons you should meet every day, or at least as often as you can, is because you know how this works. When you have to go to a meeting and tell people that you did or didn't do something, you generally get it done. And often you get it done right before the meeting. It really helps keep accountability. If you instead say, okay, we're going to do a sprint, it lasts 2 weeks, here's your job, see you in 2 weeks, there's a really good chance that job isn't going to get done. Because that person's going to be putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until finally, oh shoot, I don't have time to get it done. But if you say, here's your job, you have 2 weeks to get it done, and we're gonna talk to each other every other day, that job will get done. Generally, or there's a problem that you can talk about. So that's that. And then the test cases and results, straightforward, same trick. I give you instructions. I'm asking you to do requirements traceability. So you have the requirement that you initially put down in the software design document, a user story that came from that, and then a requirement specification that you're going to write in the software requirement specification document. These are just the numbers. And then all the test cases that you ran against that requirement specification, pass, fail, complete, not complete, any notes. This is the kind of the summary page. Requirements traceability, we'll talk about more next week. Basically, the thing is, you always have to answer the question, two questions. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because originally the customer wanted this, which generated this user story. In order to prove that we completed that user story, we required these requirement specifications. Oh, so that's why I'm doing that. And then the other question you have to answer is, hey, the customer wanted this done. How can we prove to them that we did it? Oh, they wanted this done, which generated this user story, which generated these requirement specifications, which generated these 3 tests, and we passed all the tests. So it's a two-way street, right? Where you can say, why did I do this test? Oh, to satisfy this requirement, to satisfy the customer. Oh, did I satisfy the customer? Yeah, go down, I did these tests. And then your test cases are just, why am I doing this? Give the test case an ID, initial conditions, the input, the expected behavior, the actual behavior, right? Now, if you fail the test and you have to repeat the test later, don't delete the failed test, keep it in there, and then later on. And notice it's tested by, so again, I get an indication of you know, team participation. So when you're developing code, what you should, you know, first of all, before you develop code, you should think of 1 or 2 or 3 requirements, and then run it by your team members. And they're gonna claim they looked at it and say it's fine, but they're just gonna say it's fine. And then you know, create a couple of test cases. I'm not asking for full, complete tested software. I need to see reasonable, and I don't know how to define that right now, a reasonable attempt to produce quality software that has been tested. Again, you say that this user story is done. The team wants to know the user story is done. How does the team know? They've established this informal notion of, okay, this is what it looks like for the user story to be done. How do we know? Oh, we can come up with requirements. Now, you don't have to come up with these requirements on your own. Maybe the team came up with them as part of the sprint planning meeting. Maybe during part of your development, you're saying on Tuesday, okay, on Wednesday, I want to fill out this, these 3 methods in this class. So on Tuesday, could you guys meet with me for 10 minutes and, you know, I've got some requirements, or you can come up with some requirements for these things and come up with actual, requirement specification that the team agrees on. And that way you can create the requirement. You write those things, you write your 3 methods, you immediately run some test cases and document it in here. And the good news is you're done. It's not just busy work, because what you're proving to, oh, did I freeze? Is it still frozen, or am I? Okay, I was gonna say, I'm asking if I'm still frozen, but if I'm frozen, that's a useless question. So the idea here is, it's not just busy work. Again, you need to say, when we're done with this story, we never want to visit it again. How do you know that that's going to happen? Well, we have good tested software. And remember, you're producing working software at the end of every sprint, and that software is no good if it doesn't work. So it's tested software. Now, all of these things sounds like a lot of stuff, I know. You know, you have to do the product backlog. You have to pull this into a sprint backlog. You have to do your estimates. You have to report in every day or as often as possible. You have to do requirement specification and test cases. It's a lot of work, but it's never a lot of work at one time, as long as you follow the process. And that's part of the whole principle of the process is you're doing this in a continuous fashion. You're doing a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. Now, if you wait till the weekend and say, I'm going to do all my SE300 stuff over the weekend, yeah, that's a lot of work. So the goal again is do a little bit, do a little bit. So reserve a little bit of time for this class. This is why I only have lectures 1 day a week, and it's scheduled for 2 hours, and I hope we never go for 2 hours, so that you have the time outside the classroom to do this stuff. I don't know how much you should plan on for the class. You know, the rule of thumb, if it's a 4-credit course, you should plan on 12 hours a week. And then we're eating up 2 of them here. So that leaves you 10 hours a week for team meetings and product development and learning about GitHub and stuff like that. But I don't know what's realistic. I would think an 8-hour week is an expectation you should have. And maybe a 10-hour week, but an 8-hour week definitely is an expectation you should have. Now, if you find you're working 20 hours a week on this course and like the whole class is working 20 hours a week on this course and still not getting stuff done, then something's not right. And somebody needs to change something. And that's somebody is probably me. I've mentioned this over and over, and if you had me for CS225, you heard me say this over and over. If you are working on CS225, I have a homework that's supposed to be a 2-hour homework. You've been working on it for 4 hours. For God's sake, stop and ask for help. And it's the same thing here. You have a team now, and it's their job to help you, and it's your job to help them. So if you find that you're having trouble with some software development, or you can't get GitHub to work, or you're not sure how Eclipse is supposed to work in this situation, or some such thing like that, for God's sake, stop and ask for help. And that's the whole point of this co-located thing. And if you find that your team members don't know, then you go to the TA. And if you find the TAs don't know, they go to me. And I won't know, so I'll ask someone in LB370, and then we'll get an answer. But don't spin your wheels. Don't spend hour after hour banging your head against the wall. That's the exact opposite of how the process should work. Okay, I'm pausing for questions again. And then we'll go through the team development stuff really quickly. Does it seem reasonable, what I'm asking here, the way I've set it up?
Matches what I've seen in like internships and stuff. So
Okay, yeah, even though the documentation might be a little different, or I'm sure they didn't use a spreadsheet for their backlog, but the process hopefully, yeah.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You get into an organization and they're going to dictate. They'll have uniformity across the organization as to what tools they want to use. Here, I kind of have to enforce some uniformity artificially. 12 teams, I'm going to get 12 different approaches, and that's good in terms of creativity, but it's bad in terms of me trying to figure out, okay, at the end of the semester, what grade can I give you that's actually an honest grade, and how do I manage this stuff? Other people, does this sound reasonable, unreasonable? I think this first week is going to be a little tough because there's, your startup work is a fair amount of work. But again, I'm not going to be really hard about that due date if you need, to work a couple days past to get stuff in. And let's learn one lesson that Agile tells us about this time boxing. When the time is up, whatever work you got done is the work you got done. In fact, let's talk about that. Let's say you initially develop 50 user stories. One of the things you'll do, I'll come back to you about this. Okay, here's your 50 user stories. And I'm going to say, what is a minimally viable product? And your TA and myself have to agree with you as to what we call a minimally viable product. In other words, if you were actually shipping this out for money, what's the minimum the customer would accept and still give you money? And that becomes the real yardstick. So you say, okay, I've got 50 user stories. These are 50 features of the software that we want to have. And 40 of them are composing the minimal viable product. And you run out of time at the end of the semester and you've gotten 42 of 50 done. That's good. You met your goal. 40 was the goal, the minimal goal. Same thing with a sprint. You say, okay, we're going to pull these 5 user stories into the sprint. And what happens if one of them didn't get done? Do you extend the sprint to finish it? Absolutely not. This is about time management. So you stop the sprint. The one that didn't get done gets thrown back into the backlog. And if it got halfway done, you create another user story that says, you know, basically finishing up that half. So it's about, at the end, same thing with the meetings. If you schedule a 2-hour meeting, it's a 2-hour meeting. And if you didn't get the work done in there because people were talking about other stuff, that's a team problem. Saying that we have to end at this time is really, it really focuses your attention. It's very helpful. Yeah, previous software paradigms, if the work wasn't done, they just kept extending the time and extending the time and extending the time, which also extended the cost. And Agile says, no, when you're done, you're done. And the product that you got is the product that you got. Okay. Now I'm going to go into team dynamics and I'm going to fly through these. These are things that you should know about your team. Stages of growth: forming, storming, norming, and performing. I've not seen this outside. I inherited these from Dr. Ochoa, and I've not seen this presentation of teams before. But you can see already how this is going to go. Forming, storming, norming, and performing. Forming is where you are coming together. That's the phase your team is in now. You're coming together. You're learning about each other. You're organizing. How are you going to communicate? Team processes, that kind of thing. And then storming is when you start to hit the first big disagreements, and you're kind of, you don't have a lot of process in place yet. You don't have cohesion in place yet. And, you know, maybe you're butting heads, or one person's kind of doing this and the other 3 people are doing something else. So there's that phase. And then lastly, the third one is you start to settle in and cohere as a group, and you establish norms among yourself. And now everybody knows expectations. And once you do that for a little while, then you become an actual team, you know, the performing part. So that's what these slides are telling you now. Forming, right? You're getting together, trying to figure out what this team is going to be about. I'll let you go through these slides on your own. Storming, this is when you realize that, oh, this is harder than we thought. This is different than we thought. That person, I always have done things this way, and another person in the team has always done things a completely different way. So how are we going to resolve that? Because I want to do it my way. Oh, but they want to do it their way. Or this person's a loudmouth, and this person never says anything. Does the loudmouth always get their way? Yeah, rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock. Okay. So you know, this is where you have to go through some tension to get the team to make agreement on things. Okay. After that, though, after this, and again, the goal is to get through this stage. You know, you don't want to be at the end of the semester and you're still in this stage where your team is always just arguing with each other, and, you know, people are going off and doing their own thing, and you're still absolutely confused about how to do the tasks, right? We don't want that. So then you start to get into, now you're starting to get into where you're coming to some agreements with each other. You've had a little bit of practice, you've had a little bit of process, you've had a few meetings together, you start to know how this is going to go, right? And you start to take the differences and come to some agreements on how things are going to go. Maybe compromise. It might be, okay, we'll do it all your way. And maybe, you know, it might be, let's say you have 2 completely different ways that two team members want to do things. Okay, let's try it your way for the first sprint. If it doesn't work, then during the sprint retrospective, we can talk about changing it. Right? So here's one good thing. The way the sprints work, it actually alleviates a lot of tension because you don't have to get it right the first time. You're experimenting. Oh, the first sprint looks like this. And as I said, your first couple sprint retrospectives, you'll probably have some things that you're going to want to change. After the first two, if you're still changing a lot, your team dynamic isn't working quite right. After the first two, my suspicion is you're going to be down to fine tuning or no changes at all. And then finally, the performing part. You all begin to know what your roles are, what to expect from each other, how things are going to go. You know. Okay. So please expect that with your team. It's always good to have an expectation about your team. I would say just a quick minute or so. What happens if you get a real clunker on your team? You just don't know how to. You don't know how to get them involved, or like Pitch says, they couldn't even find. You can't contact your team member. What happens? You need to get me involved. You need to get the TA involved, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. And either that person. Usually, this is how that works out. Usually, the person is taking, say, a whole bunch of classes at once, and they're having a time issue. They've got issues at home. They're having a time issue. That's usually how it works out. It's just they've overextended themselves, and that's a hard fix. And then every now and then you just get someone who, for whatever reason, is checking out during the semester. And again, these are hard fixes. If they're just being checking out, but then you say, but you remind them that behavior is going to result in bad things for them, that can bring them back in. But every now and then, you've all been on teams like this where someone's just not participating. Usually a couple of talks helps clear that up. If it doesn't, then we'll have to work out some other situation. I've only taught this course once before, and I was very fortunate. Out of I don't know, 45 people in the class or something like that, there was only one person who wasn't participating, and everyone else was really invested, which was great. I think I just got lucky that semester. I know most of you guys, because I've had you in previous classes, and I think we've got a good group. So I think things will go well. I'm optimistic. Okay, we should get out of here. Do we have questions? I don't want to leave unless if you have unanswered questions. If you're finding that you have team members who are not attending these lectures, which is fine, please verify that they are reading the notes, watching the recordings, that they're not just not participating. Right? That's part of what your team needs to do is help each other be accountable, help each other stay on task. Again, the whole trick here is to do a little bit continuously so it doesn't all pile up. Okay.
Yeah, one question about
Yes.
Team roles. You said they would alternate during
Yes.
sprints.
Yes, in between sprints. Yes, right.
Okay.
Once,
how do we document kind of like who's holding the role and kind of pass that to you or the TAs?
I think an informal with the TAs will be fine. Yeah,
okay. Good.
We can add that to the product backlog or the sprint backlogs. Yeah.
Okay.
I could do that. I can modify this document to add it to the sprint backlog too. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. There's few enough. Well, probably being too optimistic to think that I can keep track of that informally. So yeah, let me add that. That's a good point. Other questions? All right, guys. Thank you for being here. I will see you next Monday. And remember, I have office hours on Wednesdays.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.